Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Costigan. I work in the Secretary's office here at HUD. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Greg Byrne to my far right, who works in the Office of Public and Indian Housing, Diane Thompson, also in PIH, and Margaret Salazar in the Office of Multifamily Programs. Today we want to share with you the proposed implementation details of the Rental Assistance Demonstration, or RAD. Hopefully most of you are familiar with RAD, authorized by Congress last November in HUD's 2012 appropriations bill, and based on our FY12 budget proposal last year. Most of you know that the purpose of RAD is to generate additional sources of financing to address the substantial backlog of capital needs in public housing and with the so-called multifamily orphans, the Rent Sup, RAP, and Mod Rehab programs. The public housing backlog today stands at nearly $26 billion as documented by the recent App Needs study. Without additional financing resources, we stand to lose about 10 to 15,000 hard units of just public housing each year. RAD will test on a limited basis the conversion of assistance for both public housing and the orphans to long-term project-based Section 8 rental assistance, to better access private debt and equity investments to help address that backlog and to stem the loss of this very much needed housing. In publishing the initial notice last week, and maybe you've had a chance to look through it, we sought to lay out in considerable detail how HUD proposes to implement the authority Congress granted us in the 2012 appropriations bill. I say proposes because the initial notice is designed to solicit your comments. Over the last year, hopefully we've had over the last year an opportunity to discuss your thoughts, your inputs with us on how to implement the demonstration. The challenge now is to translate the statutory authority into a workable demonstration. We fully realize that what we propose now is neither perfect nor complete, despite being fairly lengthy, and may not be sufficiently addressing the questions and the inputs that you offered us. A lot of this is by design. We now are seeking your input to further detail the comments that we're seeking. Once we have all of your comments, we will thoroughly review them and then issue a final notice guiding RAD's implementation later this spring. Before going into the details of the initial notice, let me underscore a few givens in the RAD authority. That is, what Congress said we have to do, and no volume or eloquence of your comments will be able to change that. First, in last year's budget environment, Congress judged that RAD can only be piloted on a no-cost basis. Basically, this means that when rental assistance is converted from one type of assistance, for example, Section 9 operating and capital funding for public housing, to Section 8 assistance, there can be no increase in the amount of that assistance when it's converted. Obviously, this affects initial rent levels and how rents can be adjusted, and we'll address that more today. Second, Congress also decided, partly again for budget reasons, that there should be a 60,000 unit cap on the number of public housing and mod rehab units that could be converted under the competitive or the first component of the bill. But Congress also allowed in a second component of the bill for mod rehab, rent sup, and RAP properties to project-based assistance in certain circumstances on a non-competitive, non-cap basis. The variations allowed under the first and the second components of the bill make RAD a bit complex to implement, and so blame the length of the initial notice on that. We'll walk through today some of those complexities. And in subsequent webcasts this week, we'll go into considerably more detail for each of the sections of the initial notice. For participants today, you'll be able to submit your questions to us via email. The email address to submit those questions to us is up on our whiteboard today. Please send them to rad@hud.gov. All right, enough said by way of background. Let's get into the notice. So let me hand this off to Greg Byrne, who'll give us an overview of what we're proposing in the initial notice. Greg?
Great, thanks, Pat. What I want to do is go to this whiteboard here and see if I can demystify a little bit this sort of 130 some odd page notice. So the notice is RAD notice, is PIH 2012-18. That's the official RAD number, although it's jointly issued by the Office of Public Housing and the Office of Housing. And this conversion authority, which the 2012 appropriation bill gave us, there are three sets of property types. Public housing, which we call Section 1 of the notice, mod rehab, which is in Section 2, and rent sup wrap on Section 3. What we try to do is make each section sort of stand on its own, so you don't have to keep referring back to different sections if you're in mod rehab and whatnot. So I'm going to start here with Section 1, which is public housing. And down here I have these boxes, PBRA, PBV, and TPVs to PBVs. So PBRA is the acronym which stands for Project-Based Rental Assistance, and what we really mean there is the ability to convert to traditional multifamily housing, housing that's administered by the Office of Housing, whereas PBV is the Project-Based Voucher Program, which is the component of a housing authority's voucher program where today they can convert 20% of their vouchers or take 20% of their vouchers and attach them to specific buildings. So for public housing authorities, what they have is the ability to choose between PBRA and PBV, but there's a few conditions here. And those conditions are, first and foremost, is that the Congress only gave us the authority to convert 60,000 units under this first component of the demonstration. The Congress also said that it has to be done through a competition, and we'll talk more about the nature of that competition as we go along. And another sort of real defining element of this first component of the demonstration is that it has to be done at current funding. Okay, 60,000 units, competition, current funding are sort of three things that characterize really this first component of the demonstration for public housing. Mod Rehab also has the ability to convert under this first component of the demonstration, which they convert to PBRA or PBV, in which they also are subject to the same 60,000 unit cap, also subject to competition and based on current funding. I'm going to move now over to rent sup wrap for a moment. And under rent sup wrap, that rather than being able to choose between project-based rental assistance or project-based vouchers, it's a much more limited demonstration. And it really just gives the authority for these owners of rent sup and wrap projects at contract termination or expiration. So when that contract expires or terminates, that a rent sup wrap owner, rather than using the tenant protection vouchers, or TPVs, which would normally be given to the tenants of the property, that the owner has the right to convert those tenant protection vouchers to project-based vouchers, again, under the Section 8 voucher program. And under this, compared to the first component of the demonstration, there is no competition. So there's no competition, there's no cap on the number of units that can convert either. And the Congress gave us the authority really through 2013 in which to sort of do this second component of the demonstration. And there is both a prospective authority, which is the properties that are converting between now through the end of 2013, but they also gave us some retroactive authority back through October of 2006. And when Margaret speaks about the rent sup wrap, she'll go into more detail on that. So that's the demonstration. Three different sort of classes of properties. The public housing properties being able to convert to project-based rental assistance or project-based vouchers, but subject to the 60,000 cap, competition, no more than current funding. Rent sup wrap being on the more limited aspect demonstration, just purely being able to take the tenant protection vouchers and convert them to project-based vouchers, no cap, no competition. And mod rehab actually benefiting from both sides. It can either sort of be subject to the competition and sort of go the same way as public housing, or it also has the ability to convert to TPVs and project-based those vouchers. So one last thing, Pat, before I sort of turn it back to you. So in terms of, we mentioned that the notice is organized Section 1, Section 2, and Section 3, that for public housing and mod rehab, the notice is proposed. 30-day comment period, which expires April 9th, 2012, and that these are all proposed, everything for public housing and mod rehab, whether mod rehab is moving sort of in this direction or this direction. But rent sup wrap, it's effective immediately, and we call it sort of interim authority. And that what we really want to do, because these properties have no sort of real renewal option, that for those that are expiring now, we wanted them the ability to be able to convert, if that's what they want to do, their TPVs to PBVs. But we'll still solicit comments, and after we review the comments, we may make some subsequent changes for prospective conversions after that point, after we issue the final notice. Okay?
Great overview, Greg. Thanks a lot. Now I'd like to ask Margaret Salazar to help walk us through in a bit more detail how the Rent Sup and the RAP program will actually work. One of the main goals of RAD, Margaret, as we all well know, is to generate financing for, in this case, Rent Sup and RAP projects. Why doesn't that work now? What's the problem? And what does RAD do differently to help us raise additional capital?
Thanks, Pat. I'm happy to talk about that. So as we've mentioned previously, Rent Sup and RAP properties are unique. They're particularly vulnerable because the contracts are expiring, and unlike Section 8 project-based rental assistance contracts, HUD does not have the authority to renew them. So when the contract expires, that's it. There's no ability to renew it. So HUD originally sought authority under RAD to convert those Rent Sup and RAP contracts to Section 8 project-based rental assistance contracts. Well, RAD doesn't quite allow us to do that, but it does provide another helpful new tool to preserve the properties for the long term. So under RAD, owners can convert the properties, the assistance, to project-based voucher contracts with 15-year terms. The assistance will be tied to the project, which means that the owner will be able to leverage that project-based voucher contract to bring debt and equity financing into the property to make repairs and maintain the project as affordable housing.
Okay, great. Margaret, another goal of RAD is to give residents more choice in where they live. How will that work as we convert Rent Sup and RAP properties under RAD?
So the Rent Sup and RAP project will be covered by a project-based voucher contract, as we've said. So the project-based voucher program rules related to choice and mobility will be in place. What that means is that a resident in a project-based voucher unit will have the ability to move after 1 year and will be eligible for the next available tenant voucher from the PHA.
Great. So let's talk a minute about how the Rent Sup or the RAP owner can pursue a conversion to PBV's project-based vouchers under RAD. There's both, as Greg pointed out, a prospective and a retrospective or retroactive eligibility for doing this. Is that correct?
That's right. So I'll talk a little bit about prospective first. If the contract has not yet expired or terminated, RAD considers that to be a prospective conversion. The project-based voucher contract is essentially provided in lieu of the tenant protection vouchers that would otherwise be provided to the residents of the Rent Sup and RAP units at the property when the contract expires or terminates. So how this works is that the owner actually submits a request directly to the multifamily field office. The request must be submitted at least 60 days prior to the expiration or termination date of the Rent Sup or RAP contract to provide time to review it. So Section 3 of the RAD program notice provides detail on what the owner actually submits with that request. So I won't go into that today, but what I do want to talk about is the process. So the owner develops the application the request following the guidance in the RAD notice. As part of that, the owner is to provide tenant notification and a 30-day tenant comment period. Tenants are provided a briefing by the owner with the multifamily and the public housing field office staff providing the briefing and the owner present. When that is complete, the owner submits the application to the office. 60 days prior to contract expiration or termination, the multifamily hub staff reviews the owner's request. If it meets the requirement of the notice, the multifamily office informs the public housing field office director that it in fact meets the terms of the notice. then the Public Housing Field Office selects a PHA to administer the contract. Now, per the RAD statute, the PHA has the opportunity to consent to actually entering into that PBV contract with the owner. And if the PHA does not consent, then the Public Housing Field Office will actually seek an alternative PHA to administer the contract. So at that point, then the PHA actually executes the contract and enters into the contract with the owner.
So that's the prospective component.
Right.
Now, as you also mentioned, there's a retroactive component. Can you explain how that works, how it's different?
Sure. So there's a couple of main differences here. RAD does provide the authority to convert assistance in rent-sup or REP projects where the contracts have already expired or terminated. That's only for fiscal year 2006 and later. So here again, the tenant protection vouchers have already been issued to residents in those properties. We're calling this a retroactive conversion. The vouchers that have already been issued and are being utilized by the families at the property will convert to project-based voucher assistance. So two main differences I wanted to highlight today for folks. The first main difference here is that the owner applies directly to the PHA that is administering the vouchers at the property. They actually don't make an application to HUD at that point. The second main difference between retroactive and prospective is that for retroactive, tenant consent is required. So I mentioned for prospective conversions, there's a tenant notification, a tenant comment period, and a tenant briefing. But retroactive conversions, in those cases, only the households that consent in writing to convert their tenant vouchers to project-based vouchers will have their assistance converted to the PBV contract.
Okay. Thanks for that, Margaret. Let's shift gears now for a minute and ask Diane Thompson to talk with us a bit about mod rehab, which has multiple options under the bill. So Diane, could you help us understand those options?
Sure. Well, Pat, first off, there are just a few differences between mod rehab and rent, sup, and wrap that Margaret just described under the second component of the bill. And there's really just three that I'd like to highlight. First off, the section of the notice dealing with mod rehab components under the second component of the demonstration is proposed. So the public will have the opportunity to comment, unlike rent, sup, and wrap, which is effective immediately. And the reason that we decided to go that route is because owners of mod rehab projects, they have the opportunity to renew their contracts annually for 1 year. The second major difference is that mod rehab owners will be required to submit a financing plan. Mod rehab projects underwent a moderate level of rehabilitation some 15 to 30 years ago. So we recognize that these projects may be in much need of repair. So we are requiring that the owner submit the financing plan to demonstrate that the project will be sustained both physically and financially for the term of the contract. And basically just to ensure that it's viable for long-term preservation. And the third important difference is that the mod rehab owner is going to submit the request to the currently administering PHA. And they'll submit that request 120 days prior to the expiration of the contract for both retroactive and prospective conversions. The PHA has to consent, and once the PHA does, the owner would submit that application to HUD headquarters.
Great. Can you talk a little bit more how the mod rehab program, the conversions, will work under the first component of RAD? In particular, how is it different from the way that public housing will be converted that we're going to talk about more in a minute? But how does mod rehab work?
Sure. Actually, the process is going to be very similar. As Greg described, there will be a competition. Owners are going to be able to choose either between PBRAs or PBVs. And rents, they will be based on the current funding level, as Greg described. And also, there are certain provisions for public housing that are unique just to the public housing category. For example, use agreements, ownership controls, and resident grievance procedures. Those things would not apply to mod rehab owners.
Okay, great. So still under the first component of the demonstration, where mod rehab converts at current funding, what will be the contract term?
Great question. For project-based rental assistance contracts, the contract term will be for 20 years initially. For project-based voucher contracts, the initial term will be for 15 years, with the option of requesting an additional 5-year initial term. So the total term could possibly be for project-based voucher conversions 20 years upon the consent of the PHA.
Right. So you've talked a little bit about rent setting. How do rent increases or adjustments work over those contract terms?
Well, under the first component, as I indicated, it's going to be at current funding, the initial, the rent setting. However, the increases will be performed through an operating cost adjustment factor for both project-based rental assistance contracts as well as for project-based voucher contracts. And under the second component of the demonstration, the requirements for rent increases will be consistent with the project-based voucher program rules. So basically the owner would request a rent increase from the PHA on its anniversary date, and the rent may be increased by the PHA up to 110% of the FMR, limited by rent reasonableness, of course.
Right. Overview. Let's leave mod rehab for now. And Greg, I'd like to turn it back over to you. If you could walk us back through how the first section of the bill on public housing, how those public housing conversions will actually work.
Sure, Pat. So under the first component of the demonstration, again, subject to 60,000 cap, actually the 60,000 units, we're going to reserve about 58,750 for public housing conversions and about 1,250 for mod rehab conversions, and those are sort of representative of those sizes of those two portfolios. But a PHA will apply, and we'll have ranking factors we'll go into probably at the next webinar, not this one. And PHAs will submit an application, and the application will require them to sort of walk through the basic sort of pro forma, or how they propose, what are they going to do with the current rents, and what are their operating costs, and how might they, if they need to raise debt, can they raise the adequate debt? And after we review the applications and those that get awarded based on the selection factors, we'll issue to the PHA something called a CHAP, a commitment to enter into a housing assistance payment project. And then from there, the PHA will have about 6 months to come back to us with a firm financing plan, and that once we review the financing plan for feasibility and everyone's okay, then we'll sign the HAP and they'll be converted then.
Right. Tell me a little bit more about financing. Where would a public housing authority go to get the financing, be it debt or equity? How does that work?
We'll go really to all the traditional sources that anybody who does affordable housing production these days goes. So if they're seeking financing, very likely they'll look to FHA insurance. If it's a lightly rehab job, then it's probably the FHA 223F program. If it's sort of more heavy construction or rehabilitation, they might do 221D4. But then some PHAs may not see a need to do FHA financing. They may find something local. They may have a relationship with a bank in town that they've had dealings with over the years. But they may also find other grant sources, other city funds. They may also choose to sort of go after the low-income housing tax credit program. They can either go to the competitive credit for 9% or the non-competitive with tax-exempt financing for 4%. And then in addition to all those sources, any of which is sort of permissible, we don't sort of prescribe any particular one, but we do prescribe that it has to be fixed rate financing, for one. The term of the mortgage cannot be longer than 40 years because we want something sort of conservatively feasible. And we can't be any balloon payments that might be due during the term of the contract. We just don't want to put any sort of undue risk on the property. And I guess maybe just the last comment to make is that PHAs, when they're sort of scoping out their project and looking at how much the project can support in first mortgage financing, if the project itself at current funding, let's say the property needs $25,000 per unit in rehab, but the first mortgage can only support $20,000 in rehab, the PHA could also, as part of the demonstration, look to either its existing operating reserves or existing capital fund program and bring over any of those sources necessary to make the deal feasible.
So it'll be very common to other affordable housing projects where basically there's likely going to be a gap, and the gap is going to have to be solve through the creative financing.
Right, and really every project will be different, right? So the current funding might be just right in the zone. In other cases, they'll need to sort of get a little haircut. In other places, it's a much larger leap, yeah.
Financing sources, lenders and investors are always interested in who owns and who manages the project. Now, how's that going to work under the public housing portion of the bill?
Right, so under public housing, that at conversion, the property must stay in either public or nonprofit hands. So the PHA can either own it outright as its own, so as the PHA. It might decide to create a nonprofit if that's what it wanted to do. And it cannot, the initial conversion cannot be transferred to any sort of for-profit ownership, with one exception, and that is if the PHA needs to go out and get low-income housing tax credits, then that's a requirement of the program. In order to raise the credits, you need to have a for-profit sort of ownership body. So that's at conversion. And then down the road, there are provisions in there where if, for which we don't expect many instances to occur, but if there's a foreclosure or a default or bankruptcy in any of those sort of severe, unusual circumstances, that then the first options are to try to find another public body, and then if not, a nonprofit, and then it can go into a normal for-profit body.
Okay, great. So let's talk a minute now about who oversees what at HUD. So Diane talked about PBVs, that's a province of public housing, and the PHAs will continue to play their role in administering project-based voucher contracts. Now, what happens in the first component of the bill when a public housing authority or a mod rehab owner converts to project-based rental assistance? Who oversees that at HUD?
When it converts to project-based rental assistance, PBRA, and I'm a PHA or I'm a mod rehab owner, I, as a PHA, my property leaves the public housing program. It is no longer be part of the public housing program, and it will be administered by HUD's Office of Housing. There's another 1 to 1.5 million units that are administered by the Office of Housing today through long-term Section 8 assistance contracts. And then generally the protocol under the Office of Housing is that the day-to-day HAP administration is performed by performance-based contract administrators, or PBCAs. So the Office of Housing will oversee it. They'll subcontract to a PBCA to do the HAP oversight, the annual management occupancy review, the subsidy administration, all those duties. But if the PHA decides to convert to PBVs, then that project still remains in the voucher program, and it's still, we would say, within the PIH family is really.
Okay, great. One last provision I know that everyone has had a lot of interest in and a lot of questions, how the choice mobility component that we're offering residents will work under the first component of the bill relating to public housing and also to mod rehab. Can you walk us through how choice mobility can work for residents?
Sure. Again, I think I'm going to go to the diagram or the whiteboard to help this out. So, so here we have choice mobility, and the rules are different whether you convert under the first component of the bill, or excuse me, whether you convert under either part of the bill from to PBV or PBRA. If I convert my property, whether I'm a PHA or a mod rehab owner, and I convert to PBV, just the normal PBV rules will apply, which really means sort of after 1 year, the resident, if they want to move with a voucher, then they get really the first they get the opportunity for the first available voucher on the agency's voucher turnover list. So go to PBV, that under the demonstration, no different than the standard rules for the PBV program. Residents get to move after 1 year, subject to the availability of vouchers in that program. There's a few more bells and whistles, and but without going into much greater detail, that's really the PBV program rules as they are today. Under PBRA, if I'm a housing authority and I convert my public housing, and remember, the only two under the demonstration that can convert to PBRA are public housing and mod rehab, because rent sup wrap only goes to PBV. So for PBRA, what's different is it's rather than 1 year, proposal says that the residents would get 2 years, or the latter of 2 years, or if it takes longer to do the initial repairs, the construction after conversion. So it's 2 years for there. There's also a 20% project cap. So the PHA, at its option, if it decides that it wants to sort of limit the amount of turnover from the choice mobility, it could say no more than 20% annually at that project would be subject to choice mobility.
To stop you on that, so all of the residents are eligible, but you're just talking about turnover in any 1 year with that 20% cap?
Right. There could be other reasons why people are leaving the property, but just for those that are leaving because they wanted to take advantage of their choice mobility, it would be 20%. The Housing Authority could put a 20% cap. The Housing Authority could also decide that that it could establish a 1/3 sort of inventory cap of its whole voucher program, that it could decide that not more than 1/3 of the voucher turnover would be used for RAD PBRA conversions. So those are sort of some of the three major things, but then also there's an exemption. And the department reserves the right to award up to 10% of all sort of awards of under the demonstration to those that would be exempt from the choice mobility component. And the PHA would ask for that in its application, or a mod rehab owner would ask for its application. And in order to be eligible for the exemption, it either is an agency without any vouchers, or it would be an agency that today already uses 1/3 of its vouchers for the homeless or the vets or certifies that will be providing. And so those exemptions will be awarded through the competition, essentially in accordance with the ranking factors overall, that those with the highest ranking factors would receive the exemption.
Great. Let's end the formal presentation for now and get ready to take some questions. So that's a gentle reminder to everybody tuning in today that if you haven't got your questions, please submit them by email to rad@hud.gov. While we're waiting for the questions to come in and logging them in, let me just take a minute to go over our upcoming webcast that we'll be doing really the rest of this week. As we said, we wanted to go into more detail on public housing and mod rehab. Section 1 for public housing, Section 2 for mod rehab, and Section 3 for rents up and wrap, and we're actually going to be offering a webcast on each of those sections. The first Section 1 public housing webcast is scheduled for March 15th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. The second section webcast for mod rehab is scheduled the next day, March 16th, at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And then the third section on rents up and wrap, and you'll be seeing more of Margaret for that, Diane for mod rehab, Greg certainly for public housing. That third rents up and wrap webcast will be also on March 16th, and we'll do that right after the mod rehab. That will be at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find the updated schedule of all these webcasts on our website. Again, www.hud.gov//rad. www.hud.gov/rad. Further, you can send queries, but not official comments that we've asked for in the notice. The specifics on how to do that are detailed in the notice. But if you have just general questions about anything, please feel free to submit them by email, also to rad@hud.gov. Okay, now let's take some questions that we've gotten from those who have joined in today's webcast. And let's see. Here we have one, Greg, that probably looks best for you. Can you confirm that under RAD that the operating reserves could be used for capital upgrades in conjunction with traditional financing, and how that would work? This is a great question.
So again, every PHA will apply project by project, and if it runs its basic sort of feasibility review and finds out that that the first mortgage is not going to be enough to meet the needs, then it can use existing public housing program funds, and that's public housing capital funds, whether it's the traditional capital fund program or replacement housing factor funds, but it also could use any operating reserves that it has, and the PHA. So those are all permitted uses. Normally you wouldn't be allowed to use public housing funds for something that is essentially a Section 8 program. We usually have firewall on those. But under the demonstration, we have the authority to waive certain sections of the statute, and that's one of the things that we're waiving. But what they would do, though, is they would put that in their financing plan. When eventually, we mentioned earlier that they apply, they're selected, they sign a contract that says over a certain period of time, they come back with a financing plan. And it's when they present their financing plan back to us, and it says, here are my sources of funds and my uses of funds, and one of those sources is you're identifying early on that I need to go into reserves to help support the conversion of this project. So yeah, we definitely want to facilitate the ability of these projects to convert.
Let's stay on the financing theme for a minute, because this is the sort of major purpose, is to secure this kind of financing to be able to address the capital backlog. We talked about the different places that you could go. One of the things that we mentioned was FHA, and Margaret, that's your sort of division. Maybe you can help out with this question. What FHA products do we envision might work for RAD? Are there any things that we're thinking about? Do we need a new product, or do we think some existing products are going to work well enough?
Well, you know, it's a great question. It's one that we've been thinking about quite a bit here at HUD, is FHA financing and how folks might be able to utilize it for these conversions. And Greg mentioned a couple of programs that I wanted to highlight and just underscore again. So the Section 223F program is kind of our bread and butter program here at HUD for refinance. And you can either use it for acquisition, refinance, or a moderate level of repair work. And that's something that our field offices know very well. Borrowers who are interested in that would work with an FHA-approved lender. They're called MAP lenders. And you would approach your local HUD office to discuss your interest in pursuing a loan. The other program is the Section 221D4 program, which is a program that's used for either new construction or substantial rehab. And so obviously the substantial rehab component would probably be a good fit for RAD as well. And it's the same kind of process where a PHA or owner would find a MAP-approved lender and then would work with their local HUD office to make an application for a loan.
Margaret, Diane, so one of the things we may do in the months ahead is have also a webinar on just FHA products for RAD, and we can sort of spend more time on that. But maybe if you could just explain the benefit of, say, the 223F with sort of why that's a little different than the 221D4 in terms of sort of one loan as opposed to two loans.
Right. So the 223F program, like I said, is sort of our bread and butter program. I think about 75% of the loans that we do through FHA are 223Fs. And it is one loan. It's not construction and permanent debt. It's just a fully funding loan. And so you can do what we call a direct-to-firm application, where you just submit one application for a firm commitment. And then the processing is done, like I said, at the local HUD office. And there is a moderate level of repair work that's allowed, whereas a 221D4, it's a little bit lengthier process because we do require a pre-application and then an application. But it is the advantage to 221D4. I don't want to say it's a disadvantage, because when you compare it to the other financing sources out there, what's great about the 221D4 is that we sort of call it one-stop shopping. It's your construction and your permanent debt all in one, and it's up to 40-year term. So that's also a very attractive product for folks.
There's a follow-on question about this. When we think about FHA products, we think about housing finance agencies. They do a risk share program. Will the risk share program be something that could work via an HFA for a RAD conversion? And we know HFAs will also have a role in tax credits. Maybe you could just talk about tax-exempt bonds and how that works a bit too for a minute.
That's right. We have the risk share program under Section 542C. I know That might not be familiar to folks, but it is a very popular program. We have active programs with a number of HFAs who are approved to work with us. So I think if PHAs are interested in pursuing that, their first bet would be to meet with their local HFA and discuss it, find out a little bit more about how the underwriting process works. With that program, HUD does delegate most of the review and underwriting to the HFA partners.
Okay. Greg, it looks like we have a follow-on question about the first question about the use of public housing capital funds. Interesting question. Public housing capital funds are really restricted to public housing, and here we are talking about converting public housing to actually Section 8 housing, so Section 9 to Section 8. So how can it be that we could actually use public housing capital funds in a RAD conversion?
Yeah, normally it would be a big no-no. Right? You wouldn't be allowed to use those the public housing funds, but anything for the public housing program. But here, the 2012 Appropriation Act gave us enormous sort of broad waiver authority of the 37 Act to allow for these conversions, and that's one of the authorities that we're going to use, which is to say, to facilitate the movement of this project from public housing over to the long-term Section 8, that a PHA can take sort of unobligated or unspent capital fund monies, if that's where it decides it wants to spend it, and use it towards the conversion. And again, the one thing we'll do, though, is we'll ask you to put that in your financing plan. So here, disclose, this is why I'm doing it, because once you convert, then you won't be able to go back to the well. So the thing is, put it in the financing plan so we can review it and see it, and then it's approved.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. Let's stay on the public housing side of this for a minute. A couple questions have come in. One has to do with, this is voluntary. So on the part of a public housing authority, it's completely voluntary. There will be an application process, and HUD will have a role, but doesn't the public housing authority itself have a role in sort of assessing what's the best project to submit, and how will that work?
Right. Because we asked, first, I think in 2012, we asked for $200 million for the conversion under RAD, and we asked for sort of other authorities, and that we recognize that with no current with no funding, that not every project is going to make it. Not every project is an ideal candidate for RAD. And so what we would expect most housing authorities to do, as they've been doing over the past 5 or 10 years, is looking across their portfolio and assessing, say, what do I get for funding? What is it that the operating fund provides me for this project? And what is my capital fund formula grant specific to this project? And what are my tenant rents at this project? And then think of that as, okay, now that's my contract rent. And by the way, soon we'll post on the website, for the RAD website, for PHAs, sort of those calculations, that what we know to be their current capital fund allocation for that project, their operating fund, and the tenant rents, just to make it easier for them to be able to come up with what that sort of current funding will be. But yes, we fully expect that PHAs will look through their portfolio and say, oh, these are properties that may be more easier to convert. These will be ones that will sort of take more effort. And these, the last group, I really can only do these if I bring in some other sort of significant outside funding, either grant funding or larger tax credits.
Okay, great. There's a couple more questions that have come in related to public housing. Let's take a few more there, and then there are some that are starting to come in on mod rehab and rent sup. But let's stay with public housing for a minute. And again, we'll have an opportunity this coming Thursday to dig in more into Section 1 or the public housing section of the bill. So we'd urge folks that want to participate in that to think about your questions ahead of time and begin to submit them, and we'll be happy to take them on then.
So we'll spend more time at the next seminar on the application procedure and the selection process and the milestones and sort of all that. Yeah, so we'll definitely get more chance to drill down later in the week.
Here's a very common question that comes in related to public housing all the time, and it's a fair question. So there's no additional funding associated with public housing conversions, or RAD really in general. So what's the advantage for a public housing authority thinking about this if there's no additional funding? Why would a housing authority development director think about converting its ACC into a Section 8 contract, be it PBV or PBRA, with no additional funding?
Well, the main advantage is for a PHA to be able to go out and access long-term financing. Under the public housing program, it's so difficult to approach a lender and say, here I have this property, I'm looking for a 30-year loan because I have $20,000 a unit in rehab to do. And the lender asks, well, what's your collateral and what's your pledge of how you're going to pay this back? And you know, while we have some ability of PHAs to do sort of mixed finance public housing, it's very difficult relative to, it's a much more streamlined process in the Section 8. Lenders know the Section 8 program very well, and we don't have the equivalent in public housing of a long-term contract. We have a contract that is really subject to not just annual appropriations, but a lender can't be sure what the terms are going to be. So Section 8, that it's a more readily understood platform, and the fact that they'll be signing a 20-year contract with sort of built-in operating cost adjustment factors in it makes it far more attractive for someone as sort of a lending product or feasibility than the existing public housing program.
So just to follow on that, and this goes to a question about rents that we talked a little bit about that. So at current funding, convert from ACC to a Section 8 contract, and we know that Section 8 program is really oriented to market-based rents, and really what we're trying to do in that platform, and I think as much as we can, and say in the mixed finance program, is to get rents for affordable housing relative to market. So current funding, how do we know that this program will be able to work relative to, frankly, the comparable market rents that housing authorities and owners are facing out there?
Right. Just because of the way that the legislation is constructed, by not providing additional funding for it, that you're not going to be able to go to market rents if your market is higher. You have to look at your current funding. You have to decide whether, when I stack up my rents, my tenant rents, my operating subsidy eligibility for this project, and my capital fund allocation, what can I do with that? So just for a moment, just assume that the tenant rents and the operating subsidy today are going to pay for your operating costs. So those two of the three pieces of the pie sort of are going to cover my operating. What I'm really looking at is what's my capital fund sort of grant for this project, and to what extent am I buying sort of debt service by sort of converting that. And around the country, on the order that the capital fund grant is somewhere about $140 or $150 per unit per month. And so again, if I've got this is back of the envelope, but if you say I've got my operating my operating subsidies covering my operating cost, how much will I be able with my capital fund grant to go out and, rather than getting it as a grant that's paying for capital repairs in that year, I'm going to use that to leverage for a long-term mortgage, and every $150 in debt service raises about $25,000 in today's market. So,
and there should be, if it's operating funding and capital funding, and there's a tenant rent contribution that factors into this, there should be some margin in there to be able to direct to replacement reserves over time. Is that? Is that expected?
How and we won't, we say the housing authorities have to submit a financing plan. So when we review the financing plan, we want to make sure that not only you're taking care of your existing capital needs. If there's a 100-unit property, it may have $3 or $4 million of existing needs, but what are the needs over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And so the PHA is supposed to look out over those 20 years and size a replacement reserve to sort of fit those needs. Ultimately, the PHA has to look at its current funding, operating capital, tenant rents, what other sources it can bring in if it needs to bring in, and show that the project is both meeting existing needs, but also the long-term needs through the buildup of a replacement reserve account.
One last question on public housing, which actually sort of transitions to a question about multifamily housing. And it's an important question, and we get this a lot. I'm a resident of public housing now. My housing authority, and presumably I've had a role in some voice in saying this might make sense to convert, et cetera. But let's assume that that happens. When I live in this property and it's converted, I have a set of rights and procedures and responsibility as a resident of public housing. How will that work when we convert really from the Section 9 platform, if you will, to Section 8 project-based assistance? And Margaret, you're pretty familiar, and I know Diane, you know both sides of this, so maybe either of the two of you could help with that question.
Go ahead.
Under the conversion of public housing to PBRA contracts, the tenant procedural rights that are currently in place for public housing will carry over into the new contracts, which is something that's unique for those public housing residents. And that was something that was in the RAD language, and we think it's an important provision, so that's carried over in the demonstration.
And Pat, there's also, in addition to those procedural rights, that we also have sort of important tenant consultation requirements for all properties that are converting through the demonstration, and so that we get input from residents through the process.
Okay, great. Margaret, here's a specific question, I think it's for you, that's come in, and that is, my RAP contract expired last year, and my residents were issued vouchers. Most of them have chosen to stay in the project. Is my project eligible under RAD even though I don't have a RAP contract on the project right now? Sounds like the retroactive,
Right,
I'm sorry.
That's right. So as we've mentioned, for the Section 3 of RAD, which is Rents Up and RAP, there, as well as for mod rehab, there are provisions for retroactive conversions. And what's nice about that, and I just want to underscore this, is that it also means that the owner doesn't kind of have to race against the clock to try to get an application or a request in for a conversion before the contract expires. This takes time, all the steps that we've discussed, and so you can pursue in retroactive. So only those residents that have tenant protection vouchers that were provided when the contract expired or terminated, it's only those households that are eligible to have their assistance converted, and the households have to still be in place at the property. So even if let's say 20 residents receive vouchers, but only 5 of those families are still residing in the property, it's only those 5 families that would have their assistance potentially converted. And again, it's only families that provide written consent to the conversion.
Okay, great. So you that was a question specifically about RAP, but that also applies to mod rehab. Is that correct as well? The whole retroactive and the prospective, we went through this, but it's in the second component of the bill, as we call it in the notice. We have this retroactive and prospective that apply to both Rents Up and RAP properties and mod rehab. Is that correct, Diane?
Yes, it also applies to mod rehab. The owner will have the ability to request a conversion for contracts that expired, either the initial contract or the renewal contract that expired in 2006 up until the time of this notice. And they'll be able to convert those vouchers at the property to project-based voucher assistance. Again, as Margaret said, provided that the families consent to the conversion.
Okay. And there's a follow-on question I think applies again to you, Diane, and Greg mentioned this, but let's go back over this again. And that is, I thought the project-based voucher program requires that not more than 25% of the units in a building be assisted. Is that going to prevent my project from converting under mod rehab, or I guess also under Rents Up and...
That's a great question, and actually we will go into a lot more detail on subsequent webinars this week. However, just to answer the question, we have certain waiver authority under RAD, under the second component of RAD, and one of those things is to allow for a different income mixing standard or to waive it completely. And HUD has decided that it was important to preserve certain provisions of the PBV program, but also to ensure that RAD is going to be effective at preserving these projects. So one thing that we've done is that we've allowed for the income mixing requirement to be set at 50% rather than 25%. So 50% of the units will be able to be project-based, and the regular exceptions under the project-based voucher program will apply, which may allow an owner to go up to 100% of assisted units under the project-based voucher program.
Okay, great, that's helpful. Looks like we just have a few more minutes, so probably time for maybe one, at most 2 questions, but here's one that's come in about choice mobility. Let's go back to this for a minute. And the question is this: When a resident exercises his or her choice mobility or right to move option, does the subsidy remain on the property or leave with the resident and his or her family? How does that work? Who wants to take that question? Okay.
The subsidy will remain on the project. It is a project-based subsidy. So if the family exercises its right to move, then the Housing Authority would issue that family tenant-based assistance to do so, and the project-based voucher assistance would continue. The unit would remain under the contract.
Okay, great. Well, I'm seeing, actually, that is the last question that we've had posted from our participants today. So what we'd like to do is just wrap it up. I'd like to thank Greg and Diane and Margaret for helping out. And I want to remind those of you that are participating in the webcast today that this webcast will be archived and posted on www.hud.gov/rad. So without any further questions, we'll wrap up today's webcast and encourage you to tune into the next webcast or actual multiple webcasts that we have on public housing, on mod rehab, and on rents up and wrap. Thank you very much.